Is a new world order coming? The rising of emerging economies is rewriting the rules of power and influence. Now, the Global South accounts for more than 40% of the global economy and drives 80% of the world's economic growth, gaining influence not only in trade and production, but also in global finance. How far can these new players go in shaping a fairer international system? What does this mean for traditional institutions like the IMF? Can emerging economies make their voices heard? I sat down with Paulo Nogueira Batista Jr, a distinguished Brazilian economist who has navigated both worlds as former executive director at the IMF and former vice president of the New Development Bank. Mr. Paulo Nogueira Batista Jr, welcome to The Point.
Thank you.
I know there's a lot of talk about the rise of the Global South, that we want a more fairer and more equally representative international governance system. I want to go into straight to the challenges that we're faced with. What exactly is the biggest factor that's preventing the reform from moving forward? Because we all know the voting rights reform, which took part almost 10, 15 years ago, and you said,
15,
yeah, in one of your articles, that not an inch has moved since then.
Right.
Why is it the case?
Well, I think we have two things at the same time. We have a decline of the West, the US, and even more of Europe in relative terms, and in some respects in absolute terms as well. And the unwillingness of this North Atlantic axis to accept the fact that the world is changing. They no longer hold the power they have. So how do they react? In many ways. And one way they react is blocking, totally, since 2010 in the case of the IMF, any reform in governance that would make the institutions they control more representative. So, for example, in the IMF and in the World Bank, they fear any reform in governance because they understand that under any formula, any criterion you may choose, China has to rise a lot. Mm-hmm. China is the most underrepresented of the major countries. So since they want to keep China down, reform stops for this reason and others. No? So it's basically the conservatism of powers that are no longer as powerful as they were, but want to hold on until dear life to the power that they still have. No?
So on the one hand, we have the rise, the uncontainable rise of developing countries, as China is a very prominent example. And then you have on the other side, the will to stay in power, or the desperation to stay in power. At which point is things going to erupt under such pressure? What will happen? What must happen?
You have two scenarios. One which would be the continuation of this slow, painful decline with international repercussions, with sanctions, with pressure on China, pressure on other countries. The second scenario is a sudden collapse of the world, the Western world order. Say if you have a new major financial crisis, similar to the one they had in 2008, 2009, the North Atlantic financial crisis, if something like that occurs, and it's possible, then there would be a sudden breakdown in the resistance because of for lack of alternatives, for lack of strength, would I say. Yeah? So that is why I think China, Brazil, Russia, and other countries should be thinking in depth about the alternatives to the Western system. Because we may not be in the comfortable position of postponing our initiatives. We must improve the ones we have urgently and create new initiatives, for example, in the monetary and financial area.
Would you go into a bit more specifics, for instance, creating the new alternative that you described? Give an example, please.
Actually, we need to, given the intransigence of the West, we BRICS countries and Global South countries, we need to think of a complete new international monetary and financial system, for instance. So this is a tall order, but let me give you a few examples, or one example. The dollar is no longer trustworthy for many reasons. we need an international reserve currency. Could it be the renminbi? Perhaps not, because China is hesitant to allow its currency to play a large-scale international role, and I understand this hesitancy. But if the dollar declines, the dollar even collapses, and there's no alternative out there, renminbi can't do it, the euro can't do it, we don't have an international currency in the IMF, the special drawing rights are contained by the US since the very beginning. So the alternative would be for a group of countries, BRICS-centric, but not necessarily all BRICS, plus a few other countries outside BRICS, to build a new monetary structure, to construct a reserve currency alternative to the dollar. Because, you know, de-dollarization is ongoing. If you look at the transactions between China and Russia, for example, or China and India, to a lesser extent China and Brazil, they are done largely or almost totally in the case of Russia, China, in national currencies, meaning that they bypass the dollar. But there's a weakness, because a system of trade in national currencies does not deliver what we need, because it does not allow countries to register trade and surpluses and deficits. I'll give you just a brief example. Russia and India. Russia has a large surplus with India. If it trades in rubles and rupees, what happens? Russia accumulates rupees, an inconvertible currency that tends to that is a depreciation hit, that has a depreciation risk. So Russia is not willing to hold. What can it do? It can go to the dollar? No, the dollar is dangerous.
Yeah, what would be the solution?
It can go to renminbi to a certain extent, but China is reluctant to allow a large extent. So the solution would be to create a new reserve currency where countries that need to park their resources can do so safely and liquidly, you know.
Are you talking about a BRICS currency, or are you picking from one of the existing currencies we have in the world?
No, it would be something different, entirely different from what the currencies we have in the world. You see, because the international currencies that we have in the world are all either national or in one case regional, the euro. So we have a strange situation, which is always problematic. Economists know about that. A central bank that is national, issuing a national currency, allows this currency, or seeks to allow this currency to play an international role. You see, this creates a discrepancy between the international and the national role of the currency in question.
Yeah.
So what we need is something different, a parallel currency that does not play a domestic role anywhere. It does not create
just plays an international role.
An international role without a domestic role.
All right.
So sometimes people say, oh, what you're proposing is not possible because the BRICS cannot have a monetary union. They don't.
What do you say to this kind of criticism or doubt, detractors? Or
I'd say this is, you're trying to hit a straw man, because nobody's thinking of having a euro-like currency for our countries. No, it would be a parallel currency that would circulate alongside the national currencies and would not interfere with the domestic policies of the countries involved.
That is a very imaginative, a very innovative, I would say, design.
Yeah, so it's difficult because it has never existed in world history.
Wow. Before people start to look for this kind of solution right now, what are you sensing that countries in the global south are willing to continue trying? Because just now you said one way is to, for a revolution to take place. The other is to continue pushing, however slow it is, the reform of the current system. Do you think developing countries are still trying this method, although the prospects not looking very good?
The prospects are not good at all. Developing countries, including China, may use the rhetoric. We need reform of the governance, meaning a reform of the Western created institutions. But I suppose everyone knows by now that this won't happen, you see. So the alternative really, either we do our own system.
But then there will be two parallel worlds, or what?
That's what we have already in practice. Someone here in China was telling me the world is divided in two sorts of persons, those that use WeChat and those that use WhatsApp. So we already have two worlds,
Is this a reality that we have to live with for at least a certain period of time?
For the foreseeable future, but I cannot discard that in, say, 30 years, the geopolitical split that we have now is overcome and we can have a global order. Something that we've never had, actually.
It was a Western order.
Exactly, imposed on the rest of the globe. So I think But it would not be a BRICS initiative necessarily, because some BRICS are very reluctant to challenge the US, notably India. So maybe we could move with a group of countries, China, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, others, with India or other reluctant countries joining later if we are successful.
But as you mentioned in one of the interviews, recent interviews, he said, look, the IMF or the World Bank, as ineffective as they are, they have 190 members each. The New Development Bank, for instance, by now only has 10 members.
You're right.
And maybe, it will continue drawing, but by the time it gets 190, it's going to take quite some time. Why are countries the majority of developing countries going to be reluctant to say, okay, at least I put my eggs in both baskets? Before they say I'm going to put all my eggs in your basket.
We're all doing that, Even China, Brazil, the leading countries of the BRICS, Russia, they have eggs in the two baskets. We haven't left the IMF. We haven't left the World Bank. We haven't abandoned the dollar, As President Putin once said, I'm not against the dollar. The dollar's against us.
China, neither. We want to continue trading. We want to continue engaging with the Western countries.
Yeah, but we should do so without illusions. I agree with you that the IMF and the World Bank have 190 members. They are not useless. They provide technical assistance. They provide lending under certain conditions, not always ideal. But the problem is that they're so heavily controlled by the West that they've become a political instrument of the Western countries. So you know how it works, huh? You have a black list and a white list. The blacklist countries that are not helpful or seen as hostile, they get nothing from the World Bank and the IMF. And there's a white list of countries that are seen as satellites. Ukraine, for example. Ukraine gets amounts of money, enormous, from the IMF.
Because it says yes.
Well, it's an instrument of the West. Ukraine is an instrument. So the fund, the IMF and the World Bank give money to Ukraine with very favorable conditions in large amounts. So this brings us, look at the absurdity. Ukraine has received more World Bank loans in the recent past than the entire continent of Africa. Can you believe that? So this shows that the Washington institutions have been totally distorted. It was always a bit like that, but in my time I felt it too when I was in the fund. I was in the IMF as director for Brazil and other countries for 8 years. I felt that at the time. But it's become much worse as the geopolitical split worsens. The West is anxious to, use all the power it can use, even if this wrecks the credibility of institutions they created and control. It's amazing,
So what do developing countries have to do among themselves? For instance, they have this kind of forums where they come and exchange ideas, understand each other, know each other better. Do you think within the developing countries ourselves, the awareness is there, that the unity is strong enough, the mutual trust is there, and the confidence in ourselves are strong enough for us to say, this is the future, we're going to work towards that?
I always say the following, look, if the West, the United States, Europe, the World Bank and the IMF want to stay in the 20th century, let them there. We're going into the 21st century, a century which is completely different, not dominated by the old powers, more multipolar, more multifaceted, So, but let me tell you, I think when you speak of the global South, it's 140 countries, very diverse, many of them vulnerable to Western pressure.
Right.
So countries like China, like my own country, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, which are large and have more potential, we should understand that it's up to us, to make a special effort to generate trust, generate confidence, to generate ideas that are well placed, well thought out, Because this won't be coming from the more vulnerable countries, They are under Western influence, Western pressure, fighting for their lives, So China, because of its size, has a very special role in this.
Absolutely. Well, let's see. Let's focus on what we have to do among us, on ourselves,
Yes.
I would say. Well, thank you so much, but it's been a very inspiring conversation. Paulo Nogueira Batista Jr., an economist from Brazil, former Vice President of New Development Bank and former Executive Director of the IMF. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.